All right, I'm going to wait for a few more minutes for a few people to join. I want to welcome those of you who are here already to our second uh, Facebook Live Sabbath School Teachers Meeting. And I'm looking forward to tonight's topic. It's one that should be somewhat familiar to most of us. We're talking actually about the Sabbath. And I have some good information to share with you. If you have comments, uh, go ahead and type them in throughout the meeting. I'm not at my home office. I'm on the road, so doing things a little differently. So I just pray that everything works just fine. Um, we're going to go ahead and get started. And for those of you who know someone who would like to view this video, but they're not on Facebook, I do post it to my YouTube page afterwards. One day I'll post it simultaneously, but you can always go to my website, sabbathschoolcoaching.com. There's a link for my YouTube page, and then there'll be a replay, and it will also be posted on the Sabbath School Coaching um, fan page. Tonight we're talking about Sabbath, a day of freedom. And again, for those of you who weren't here last week, the reason that we're having this teachers meeting is to give you some tips, suggestions, ideas about how to have a more productive, effective, interactive class on Sabbath. It is not my purpose to go over the entire lesson with you as if we were having a Sabbath school class. My job is to help you to teach your class in a little better way. And there's several ways that we're going to approach that. And as we go through these weekly sessions, I'm going to share more and more. Last week, one of the things that we talked about is that our classes must be more than history lessons. It just can't be information. And the two things I mentioned last week were our classes have to be inspiring and encouraging. And I explained that we want to inspire each other to reach higher in our Christian experience, to grow. Sabbath school is discipleship. The second thing we want our classes to do is to be a source of encouragement, because I am convinced that if a person is challenged to grow, they're serious about their religion and their spirituality, if they are challenged to grow and they're encouraged to deal with life, they'll come back to your class. Not only will they come back to your class, they'll probably recommend other people to come back to your class. So that's were the two things I talked about last week: inspiring and encouraging, not just information. Okay, not just information. The two words I want to stress tonight, uh, I think, are more of a challenge for some than others, is energy and enthusiasm. Um, you can't be dead when you're teaching a Sabbath school class. I know some of us are quiet people. I'm a quiet person. But when it's time to lead your class, everyone feeds off of your energy. So you have to have some energy, regardless of what the topic is. Uh, Project energy. For some of us, that means stepping outside of ourselves. But if that's what it takes to get the job done, we have to do that. So as we go through tonight's session, remember, when you stand before your class, they are feeding off of your energy. You want energy and enthusiasm. If you are not excited or happy to be in class, I don't think you can convince other people that they should be excited about being there. All right, this week's lesson, a day of freedom. Here's the number one question, and someone should write this down. Here's the number one question that you want to ask yourself is, how can this lesson help the people in my class? That's your foundation question. How does this week's lesson help the people in my class. I'm just stressing over and over. We have to move away from information. Like, since it's the Sabbath, we just go, we just go deep into the origin of the Sabbath, the purpose of the Sabbath, or whatever. I want you to be able to tell through the way you lead your class how this is going to help people. And that's what we're going to do. By the way, if you can, when you post, I would love to know where you're posting from, like if, what city or what country. But the number one question is, how can this lesson help the people in my class? And we're going to approach this week's lesson, my time with you, on how this can be impactful to the people in your class. It is important that we study for ourselves. The lesson is great. This quarter is, I mentioned earlier, it is a great quarter for a Sabbath school teacher. It's a great quarter. The topics are relevant. However, you have to take the time yourself to study these truths for yourself. You should have an aha moment as you prepare, not just reciting what you already know. So even though the lesson gives a clear outline, I want you still to ask God, what is this saying to me? Okay, so first question is, how can this lesson help the people in my class? The companion question to that is, what do I want them to take away when they leave class? When they leave your class, I see my brother Eric is on and Christina are on. If you are leading this class, when the class is over, what do you want them to walk away with? That's why you want to frame your class. So let me just give you some suggestions. I'm going to give you some suggestions. We're going to talk about the manna a little bit. 2 reasons for the Sabbath: a day of equality, a day of healing, Sabbath rest for the land. Those are rich topics all in themselves. As I mentioned, don't try to cover everything. Find 2 or 3 points and make that the emphasis of your class. I am a stickler. I'm going to say this every week, that I believe as Seventh-day Adventist Sabbath school teachers that we should study the lesson in its entirety. Everything in it. You should devour it through the week. But when you stand before your class, I want you to teach with just your Bible. I want you to do it. I gave you some suggestions last week on how to do it. I'll reiterate some of those ways on how to teach this lesson with your Bible. So let's do it this way. Before I tell you some of the directions that I think you should go into, and you can also share with me some of the ideas you have, I want you to keep in mind that your class is like a huge jet. And your role as the leader of the class, as the pilot of the class, is to get the plane off the ground on its journey without getting hijacked and to land someplace relevant. Those are basically the 3 things. You need the plane to get off the ground. To me, off the ground means I need people's hands in the air. I'm not going to spend my first 5-10 minutes doing all the talking. I need people's hands in the air, because the more participation I have, it helps them to be a part of the discovery process that I'm taking them on. Okay, so I'm going to just start from that beginning. How do we get people's hands in the air? Because it's for some teachers, it's very hard to get participation. I'm going to give you my number 1 secret. Please don't share this outside of our family. It's my number 1 secret. What I do always, regardless of the size of the class, is I start my class after I do my housekeeping, welcoming people, whatever. I do this to get people's hands in the air, and we'll use. I'll just try it out on you. You don't have to answer this, but just watch this. So the title of this week's lesson is Sabbath, a Day of Freedom. If I was leading this class right now, I would say, class, we're going to be talking about the Sabbath and how it's a day of freedom. But before we get started, I'd like to know, what does the word freedom mean to you? It's a question I'm going to start with. Or another word that we can use, because we're going to talk about manna in a few minutes, is trust, okay? So I might say, class, listen, we got a great class today. We're going to be talking about the Sabbath, the day of freedom. And one of the things we're going to spend time on is the word trust. So before we get started, I'd just like to hear from some of you on, what does the word trust mean to you? All I simply did, I asked a definition question. That's how I start most of my sessions. I didn't ask them, what did the lesson say this week about trust? I didn't ask them, what does the Bible say about trust, or anything. I just simply asked, what does it mean to you? The reason I frame it that way, anyone can answer that question. If a visitor happened to come in off the street, don't know anything about church, and I said, what does the word trust mean to you? Chances are that visitors got an idea what it means. I already went online and I already, wrote down some things. But when someone gives me the answer, I'll say, okay, great, trust. Oh, that means, well, let's go back to freedom. Freedom means what to you? Someone say, well, I think freedom means this. I say, oh, that's good, good. Tell me more about that, John. And they might say a few words. And then I'm not going to stop. I need interaction. Can somebody else share before we get started? What does freedom mean to you? Someone's going to say it means this or that. Whatever it is, I'm going to use that as my launching pad to get people's hands in the air. And then the very next thing I'm going to do is to have a volunteer to read a text. Okay? We're doing, okay, great. Thank you for those definitions. We're going to talk a little bit about manna this week and the whole experience with manna. And let's see if I have my cheat sheet ready for me. The text was from Exodus 16 through 18. Okay, I'll ask for a volunteer to read that text. When they read that text, I am not going to explain what the text means. I am going to ask my class, what does this text teach us about trust? Because we use trust as one of our definition words. And I'm just going to not say anything. Guys, what does this text teach us about trust? Be patient. If you're a teacher, I know the sound of silence is going to kill you. But someone's going to say, well, I think it shows that if we trust God, he'll take care of our lack. Now, as a Sabbath school teacher, you've already studied these texts. You know what it means. You know the background of it. But you're just trying to help people on this journey. I'm trying to take them someplace at the end of this lesson that will be meaningful to them. So here's my method. I need hands in the air. First thing I do, my secret is that I ask a definition question. I don't tell them it's a definition question. Try that. You might like it. I see my good friend Robert Patterson. Let me know how this goes for you, Robert. You're an excellent teacher by yourself, but let me know how it goes for you. So I'm going to ask a definition question to get hands in the air. Next, as I progress through whatever my topics, I'm not trying to cover the whole lesson. I'm not reading Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. I am on a theme that I want my class to arrive at. So I'm going to ask for a volunteer to read. When they read the text, I'm going to my next thing I'm going to do is ask a question. Now I want to just stress this right now. As facilitators, we're taking our class on a journey. The fuel for that journey is questions. That's how you propel the class along. It's not statements. It's not that you make some deep statement and then you move on to the next thing. You ask a question to move the class in your direction. So let's just use this for example. We're going to use the trust one. So they're going to read the text, and the children of Israel did so and gather, some more, some less. So they measure by number. He who gathered much and nothing left over, and he who gathered little had no lack. every man had gathered according to one's needs. So I'm going to ask the class, what do these texts teach us about trust? They're going to give me some answers. And I will already have prepared a text or another text in the Bible. I like to use some of Christ's stories that talk about trust, that I want to go a little deeper on. And I might say, for instance, you remember the story, there was a story in the Bible where the disciples were on a ship. Does anyone know what that story is? Some of my longtime church members, their wheels are turning. I already wrote it down on my notes, so I kind of know where it is, but I want people to be involved in the discovery. Does anybody know the story of Jesus when he was asleep on the ship? And someone will look on their phone or whatever. When they get it, I'll say, can I get a volunteer to read? I need interaction. When the volunteer reads, and we get to the punchline where Jesus says, why did you doubt? I will then say, well, why do you think Jesus would ask, why would you doubt? I want them to think about that. Well, the obvious answer is that they should never doubt his love and commitment to them. That's where I'm trying to take them to. Okay, so that's the example we're going to use. So let me just give you, let me just suggest some different ways of going about this lesson. And one of the things that the lesson talks about is healing and the 2 reasons for the Sabbath. One of the things that I would talk about, if I suggest that you spend some ample time on, is the story of the healing on Sabbath. I think as a Sabbath school teacher, that can take up at least a quarter of the time you have if you discuss that subject. And it's Mark chapter 3, 1 through 5. Of course, it's found in other versions of the gospel, where Jesus says it's lawful to do good. The reason why I am suggesting you go here, and I'm just suggesting, you might have to want to go in another direction, but I think this is relevant for today. The story when Jesus said, is it lawful to do good on the Sabbath, was really an assault on their traditions that had barricaded the enjoyment of the Sabbath. It's really what he was doing. He's breaking down the traditions when he asked that question. And notice that Jesus asked questions. That was his method of teaching. Let's follow that example. I would like to suggest that in 2019, that we have traditions about Sabbath keeping that are just that, they're traditions. They're not necessarily biblical. And sometimes our traditions get in the way of us really enjoying the Sabbath, okay? So I'm just going to give you the direction that, a possible direction that you should go in. And some of these questions I'm going to give you, you'll find in this week's lesson that I wrote an article for ssnet.org. Some of you go there to see your lessons. If you go there, you'll see a lesson outline that I wrote this week for Sabbath School. But let me just cut to the chase because I don't know how to do it any differently. The value of the Sabbath is in reconnecting to God. So this is where I would be trying to take my class. The purpose of the Sabbath is to deepen our relationship with God. That's the purpose of the Sabbath. So we have to ask ourselves, is that what the Sabbath is doing for us? Is it helping us in our relationship with God? If you read my article, here is the ironic thing about us. The Sabbath, we repeat, remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. And we talk about the Creator. I believe that we, as a church, sell ourselves short by divorcing, enjoying God's nature on Sabbath. And I say this in my article, we have replaced it with being in church all day Sabbath. That's a tradition that really is not backed up by the Bible. That if I am suggesting to you as Sabbath school teachers to look a little deeper into this subject of Sabbath keeping, that if nature reflects God and teaches us, creation teaches us more about God, and Sabbath is a chance to remember our Creator, then why is it that we don't encourage our people to spend more time in nature, period, let alone on Sabbath? So that's a little direction I wanted to suggest you go in. So I want to share some questions with you before time gets away from me. My good friend in Connecticut suggested that I go longer than 30 minutes, but I just can't right now. Brother Kitson, I'll get there one day maybe. As this progresses, you'll see that I'll start having guests to accompany me during the discussion. But this is only our second lesson, so just bear with me. I told you that the fuel for the class are questions. I want to give you some questions that you as a teacher may want to explore in your class this week. That you can use these questions to generate discussion. They still have to go somewhere when you ask the question, but if you would just think through them yourselves, it will help you generate discussion. And the first, these are the easy ones, and you'll find these in my article. What does observing the Sabbath mean to you? So I'm going to ask. I'm not going to say anything. I am not, as a teacher, going to say, this is what it means to keep the Sabbath. I'm going to take them on a discovery process. So what does observing the Sabbath mean to you? Get some answers. Tell me more, John. Tell me more, Jane. The second question is, here's another one you can try. What does it mean to actually keep the Sabbath day holy? That's a good question, I think. And the companion question is, do I have to be holy in order to keep the Sabbath holy? That's more of a challenging question, but it's a legitimate question. How can I keep the Sabbath holy if I myself am not holy? And we don't like to talk about ourselves in those ways. We like to call ourselves filthy rags, but God has invested a lot in us, and he wants us to be holy men and women of God. Here's another one. Here's another question you can try if you're bold enough. Isn't it true that the main function of the Sabbath is to come together for worship? Is that why? Is that the main purpose of the Sabbath, is to come together for worship? Let's talk about it. The reason I have these questions is because my purpose is to show that many times our traditional ways of keeping the Sabbath are not always legitimate. Here's one more question, then I want to get back to some of the things in the lesson. All right, here's a self-reflection question. Is your Sabbath observance more about what you should not do or what you should do? That takes an honest answer. Is when you think about the Sabbath class, do you think more about what you should not be doing versus what you should be doing? And if we're honest with ourselves, that probably a lot of times it's what we shouldn't be doing. I shouldn't be watching TV. I shouldn't be working. I shouldn't be doing this. I shouldn't be playing this. I shouldn't be doing that. Versus what we should be doing. And sometimes all we think we should be doing is going to church. And I'm telling you, there's more to it than that. All right, so let me give you some things for this week's lesson. Let me make sure I don't miss anything. I'm sorry about that. Okay, I think we're good. And like I said, I'm going to post this afterwards, and if you like, just send some questions later or send me an issue. So the lesson, I would only do 2 or 3 points. I would either cover manna, what are the reasons? And you can't, listen, if you're dealing with all the drama that's going on with the immigration issues in our country today, you can't ignore that. But I want you to approach it on Sabbath from a big biblical standpoint. Let the Bible speak for itself. And where we talk about the two reasons for the Sabbath, one is from Deuteronomy 5. So let me just find Deuteronomy 5 because I want to read that. Um, and if I was leading the class, I would have someone turn to that. I would have them turn to Deuteronomy 5. I would say, can I get a volunteer to read? I don't even call on people. I don't say, Jane, can you read for me? If you know your class well enough, then you can go ahead and do that. I'll say, can I get a volunteer to read Deuteronomy 5, verses 12 through 15? And really the punchline is in verse 15. That's what I want to talk about. So someone will read it, and when I get to verse 15, it says, remember that thou was a servant in the land of Egypt, that the Lord thy God brought thee out of thence through a mighty hand and by a stretched out arm. Therefore the Lord commanded thee to keep the Sabbath day. That is the basis of my question. I asked for a volunteer to read. I'm really doing three things. I'm going to repeat this over. Here's the formula. I call it the three-step method. Here's the formula on how you can teach with just your Bible. You ask a question. When you ask a question, you get answers, multiple answers, not just the first answer. Even if someone gives you the perfect answer, ask, does anybody else like to share? When they give you enough answers, I get a volunteer to read. When the volunteer reads the text, I'm going to repeat the same process I did when I started class. I'm going to ask a question. Class, what does this text teach us about one of the reasons why we are to remember the Sabbath? And the visitor and everyone's going to be looking. Well, I think it says because if we remember that God, we were servants once, or we were enslaved once, or we were whatever it is, it's leading me to where I want to go this week's lesson. I get answers from them, and I'll say, Jane, tell me more about that. Why do you feel that because we're a servant, that should change our relationship with God? And Jane will say, well, I think because if I appreciate what God has brought me from, I'll want to spend time with him. I'm taking him on the journey. Okay? After I exhaust that text, I'm going to have another text to have another volunteer to read. I'll do that 3 or 4 times. My time is up. Class is over. All I did was I asked a question. I got answers. I had a volunteer to read the text I want to read. And we got there. So let's talk about this again. You as a teacher are piloting a jet. You have to get it off the ground. You need hands in the air. You have to keep it from being hijacked. Let's see, do I have time to talk about hijackers? Oh, I only have 2 more minutes. I'll talk about hijackers next week, how to deal with hijackers, because most churches have a hijacker. I'll give you a clue now. It's your class. Don't allow a hijacker to dictate the direction of your class. Next week, I'll give you some suggestions. So I asked a question. I got answers. I had a volunteer to read. When they read, I used whatever text was read as a basis for my next question. I did the same thing. What does this text mean? After we exhausted it, I got another volunteer to read. The last thing I want to say as we close out is that I always use a Bible story. This is my personal method to sort of sum up the lesson for me. And as Seventh-day Adventists, we have an advantage over anyone because we have the Conflict of the Ages series that gives such great background on most Bible stories. So what I do is tell a story to bring it home. And I got the perfect story for you. I have the perfect story for you. And I probably, if I was leading the class, I probably wouldn't have time to have them read it. So I would just tell the story, but it's the perfect story. I would tell the story about the time that Jesus was over Mary and Martha's house. It's a perfect story because Martha was upset that Mary was spending all this time in devotion and she was busy. And many times that is how our Sabbath observance comes down to. We're the Marthas. We're not the Marys on Sabbath. We're the Martha. And Jesus said, listen, Mary made the right choice. And I would tell that story. I would take some time and tell it. I would paint the picture that there's the people that are there and how it felt like and how Martha must have been busy. Just paint the picture. Don't just quickly say it. And then as you close out, I suggest make an appeal that how many of us would like to be more like Mary? Whatever it is, you can do. Okay. Listen, don't forget, tell me where you're from. I promise I'm going to keep this at 30 minutes, so I have to go. Oh, I could keep going another 30 minutes. Kitson, I apologize. But make sure you let me know where you're from, any questions you have. I promise you next week I'll talk about hijackers. For those of you who have my number one selling book, because it's the only book I have right now, so it's the number one for me. I have a section on hijackers there, but I'll go over that in detail next week. Let's see here. Let's see. It seems easier to teach if a class is a larger class. What are tips for very small classes? It's a very, Kimberly, that's a great question. In larger classes, sometimes people can hide in the crowd, but in a smaller class, you're there. What you want to do is to not come off as if you know everything. Even if it's a small class, take the time to find out what they think and just build on that. And I gotta say this in the right way. If you are reading your quarterly to your class in a small class and the people haven't studied, that's nothing but a hotbed of crickets. This is gonna be a disaster. But I don't care if you came off the street and there's only 3 of us in there, and I say, hey, can one of y'all read John 3:16? Then, hey, chances are we're gonna have a little bit more interaction. So it is, small classes can be a challenge, but one of the things I want to say, just I have to get offline. I gotta stop. But listen, small classes are great. I'm gonna just give you this tip now. But small classes should be doing something outside of just sitting together on Sabbath. That's for a whole nother subject. And we'll talk about that. Being action units, that our Sabbath school classes should be more than just a time for us to get together and talk. That we should be doing something. My model is, and I'm the new superintendent at a new church that we just joined, and I will be encouraging our church there to do this, that every class should have a mission project. Cradle roll, all the way through every class, should have a mission project. And especially with this quarter, it's a perfect time if your class does not have a mission project. And what I always have classes tell me, especially the adults, the children, they'll get on about it. They'll do it. They'll collect coins or whatever. They'll do all these things. And the adult classes spend all their time talking about what we should do. You know, we're going to have this project. Let's do it. Let's stop saying what we're going to have. Let's do it. How do you get hands? Oh, Kimberly, I have to get offline, but how do you handle if you are asked a question you don't know the answer to? That is a great question. Listen, Kimberly, the old school way of being a Sabbath school teacher is I have all the answers. That's the old school way of teaching. That's why a lot of people don't want to be Sabbath school teachers, because they say, somebody's going to ask me something I don't know. I don't know enough about the Bible. The best way to handle that, if you are asked a question that you don't know the answer to, and it's not hijacking, I'm going to assume it's not hijacking the class, you can do one of two things. You can simply say, hey, that's a great question. Class, what do you think the answer is? Let the class answer. The second thing is a little humility and honesty is, hey, that's a great question. I'm going to have to look into that. There's nothing wrong with that. You don't have to have all the answers. So let the class answer. I always remember this incident. My wife and I were visiting a church once, and I was a guest teacher there. And it was a small class. I don't know if must have been maybe no more than 20 of us. And this lady asked a question about some obscure text in the Bible that none of us knew the answer to. I didn't know it. No one in the class, she didn't know it. She was sincerely answering this question. So we made it a homework assignment. It's okay if you don't know the answers. It's okay. Listen, my model is to always aim high. Whatever you do, always aim high. At the end of our lives, when we stand before God, He's going to ask us, what did you do with that class you had? Did you give it your all? Or did you just not put much energy in it because you were so tired from work or you were just bored? He's going to ask us, what did you do with that class? What did you do with that one talent I gave you? Let's all say, God, we multiplied our talent. We gave it all we had to help other people to know you better. Thank you all. Always aim high. Thank you all for joining tonight. I'll see you later. I'll post this video right after this finishes. It'll be on my YouTube page. Please share this with somebody. Let somebody know that on next Thursday at 9 p.m., we're going to have another teacher's class. And hopefully I'll be in my home office and we'll go a little bit more into detail in the lesson. But thank you all for joining and have a good evening.